not.
I guess, Professor Krishnamurthy, we are talking about the same person. I'm on the same job. So.
Okay.
Well, I'm on the phone with Gora, so.
Oh, you are? Okay, okay, yeah. Just tell him actually, the finance secretary just got back and said he'd arrange.
Okay, got it. Will ping.
And actually today there's so many people who are passing away, not because of COVID, but because of the implications of impact of COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah. Justin, are you all set with the logistics and everything else for the panel? You're on mute. Just okay. I think we've been all on mute, I think.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yeah.
You hear me, right?
Yes, we can hear you. So the audience also can hear you now. So be careful what we say.
Yeah.
At this stage. Otherwise, you may be quoted for the wrong thing. What's it like in Beijing these days?
Well, things start to be normalized, but caution still be there because we are afraid of the second wave.
Okay.
Yeah, but other than that, I think things are getting normal now.
Hi, Justin. We haven't met before. Subramanyam.
Yeah, Mr. Subramanyam, good to see you on the screen.
Hey, Justin, Kaushik here. I should tell Louis and Subbu, Justin has added 2 complications in my life by inviting me to Beijing in December. So you better keep the second wave under control.
We will prepare everything for you.
So who was your big influence at Chicago, Justin?
Well, Ted Schultz.
Okay.
And Gil Johnson, Gary Bakers.
Okay.
Gary Becker.
Yeah. Sherman Rosen.
I'm
he
reminded
was also on my commission.
Of this anecdote. Actually, I joined the PhD program in 2001, and 9/11 had just happened. The very first assignment that Gary Becker gave was to model terrorism.
And who are your influences at Chicago, Subbu?
Primarily Raghu and Luigi.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's interesting with the impact on technology. Luigi was doing a webinar with Angus Deaton at Princeton. And in the middle of the webinar, the power in Princeton went off.
Yeah.
So you thought you had the only say in Bangalore or Pune or something. It went off over there. And then so they moved to his cell phone, and that battery died off. Then they had to use his landline here. So
wow.
So how about the situation, the coffee in India?
Subbu?
Well, actually, the number of cases have risen. We have about 75,000 odd. But I guess, given the population we have and how, especially in the poorer sections, the proximity with which people live with each other, that's not unexpected.
Right. And how about US, Kaushik?
Justin, I'm not in the USA. I had come to India for a lecture.
Oh, okay.
The lockdown happened. So I've actually been sitting here for the last 2 months.
Oh, really?
Of course, continuously in touch with my colleagues and students at Cornell. And I'm also a lot in touch with the World Bank again, the Africa division.
Okay.
So yes, I mean, in many ways, sort of everyday life is functioning more in America, but the incidence is much higher. So there are great anxieties.
Good.
Are you at all going to the university, going out, or not at all, Justin?
No, all the courses moved online.
Yeah.
So now, I'm getting used to, use Zoom or other medium for lectures.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what activities, Justin, are not allowed at the moment in Beijing? Or what are allowed? What's easier?
I think that to have a gathering of hundreds of people, those kind of things are still controlled. And but restaurant, department stores, they are open now.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually.
Okay.
What's the chance of a second wave? How, quite unlikely, or because during the Spanish flu, it was the second wave that was far more devastating.
True. I think that, because most people are still very cautious. So when they go out, they wear a mask, and the government also monitor the situation. So I think unlikely, but you need to be very careful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just a call out, we'll start the session in a minute or so from now. We have participants trickling in, so we'll just wait a minute or so before we get started.
Louis, you're in Goa?
No, I'm in Bombay.
You're in Bombay. Okay.
I'm in Bombay. And the sun is just coming out, hitting me directly. I had this very strange thing. I was on a call day before yesterday in the afternoon, sitting on my terrace, and suddenly the call died because my phone got overheated. So I had to go and put it in the fridge for 3 minutes, and then it was okay. I hope it doesn't happen today.
Great. We're at 9 a.m. And ready to get started. Good morning. Welcome to the final day of Charcha 2020. We've heard from many speakers with diverse perspectives over the last 2 days. So it's fitting then that we begin today's plenary by speaking with people who can bring a macroeconomic perspective that can help us tie it all together. Our first plenary session, Indian Economy, Recovery Through Inclusive Growth, is a panel discussion with leading economists. It's my pleasure to introduce the panel to you. Professor Basu is Professor of Economics and the C. Marks Professor of International Studies at Cornell University. He's a former Senior Vice President and the Chief Economist of World Bank. He's also served as Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India from 2009 to 2012. He's held multiple advisory posts for regulatory and multilateral organizations, including the ILO, World Bank, and RBI. Professor Basu was awarded the Padma Bhushan in 2008. We have with us Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramanyam, Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India and a leading expert on economic policy, banking, and corporate governance. Dr. Subramanyam has authored the National Economic Surveys of 2019 and 2020, which has laid the groundwork for the union budget and other reform measures undertaken by the government. This year's focus on ethical wealth creation in the economic survey has been lauded as a notable departure in thinking about policy. It also pioneered the concept of thalinomics, the economics of a meal. Dr. Subramanyam has also served on several expert committees, including the PJ Nayak Committee for the RBI and the Uday Kotak Corporate Governance Committee for SEBI. Welcome, Mr. Subramanyam, Dr. Subramanyam.
My pleasure.
We also have Justin Lin, who is the former Chief Economist and Senior Vice President, Development Economics at the Mr. Lin has guided the bank's intellectual leadership and has played a key role in shaping its economic research agenda. One of China's leading economists, he's also served as professor and founding director of the China Center for Economic Research at Peking University. The moderator for the session will be Luis Miranda. Luis is the chairman of the Center for Civil Society and CORO. He's involved in setting up two highly successful companies, HDFC Bank and IDFC Private Equity. He's also co-founder of the Indian School of Public Policy. Luis is on the board or advisor to several corporates and nonprofits, including Manipal Cigna Health Insurance, Morgan Stanley, Educate Girls, and SBI Foundation. A very warm welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Luis, over to you to set the context for today's session and take it forward.
Thanks, Lakshmi. And thank you also, Isha, for all the help putting this together, and to the Nudge Foundation for hosting us today at Charcha 2020. It's interesting to see an economics plenary session at a development conference. And I hope it's sort of, indicative of what needs to be done in the future, that as part of the development world, you've also got to look at the financial and economic situation. I'm sort of extremely excited to have three esteemed economists with me. But a bit about the background for what we're talking about. As at least all of you sitting in India would know, that we've had the strictest lockdown as compared to other countries. And it is to curtail the spread of COVID-19. We've received a lot of acclaim globally for what we've achieved so far, but there is a challenge on the economic front, and the count does go up, but much lower than what people have expected. The government has announced various fiscal packages. It got criticized a lot for not being strong enough, but this week a 20 lakh crore package has been announced, and details are being released every day about that. We've also seen the whole challenge with migrant laborers, and the fact that these invisible people have become very visible, and the fact that they've been living on in tough conditions, and how do we provide them sustenance support? Because they've been, it's been a tough life, and how do we, more importantly, reopen the economy as without controlling a second wave of debts. So the current crisis gives us an opportunity to relook at our strategy on economic growth, and also discuss whether we need to make it a more inclusive society. So we have three great people with us today. Kaushik Basu, in order of their speaking. Kaushik Basu, followed by Krishnamurthy Subramanyam, and Justin Lin Yifu. I will spend about 4 minutes now, and then pass it on to them, and each of them will speak for 12 minutes on certain topics. We've actually got an interesting insight on this, because 3 of the 4 of us have been to the University of Chicago. But the only person on this panel who has talked about the invisible hand and the role of markets to help solve the problems has been Kaushik Basu, who did not study at the University of Chicago. But we've all got different perspectives, as you're going to see over here. Justin, based on his experience of 30 years in China and at the World Bank, has argued a lot for an active role for the government in nurturing development. His new framework of development talks about the active role of the government in supporting selected industries to trigger structural transformation. And this form of industrial policy was criticized by Milton Friedman when he visited India in the 50s on the invitation of Nehru. In 1991, we actually saw a less role of the state, and we saw unprecedented growth in India. So it'll be interesting for to hear Justin when he talks about the China story, how China has been successful in identifying industries for given country's endowment structure and level of development. Subbu, and in the hot seat today as Chief Economic Advisor, has pushed forward the idea of wealth creation. And this is an idea which for most of the last 70 years of our independence has been frowned upon. And it's a very important departure in policy thinking. Yesterday on the track organized by the Center for Civil Society, we had many sessions on civil society and prosperity, because I think we need to sort of talk more about how do we make India a rich country. And that's why, we're having 3 people over here talking about this is very interesting. Subbu has also been instrumental in pushing through the nudge ideas of Richard Thaler, who I had the privilege of hosting at a fireside chat a few months back in Delhi at the Nehru Library. And his the impact of some of Subbu's economic policy has been seen recently in the recent APMC reforms, etc. So without much ado, I'm going to pass it on to Kaushik to start off. And by the way, Kaushik's become a COVID refugee at the moment. Kaushik, over to you.
Louis, thank you very much. Thank you. It's lovely to see friends from a long time ago. Justin, Subramanyam. In fact, I was just thinking that at the World Bank, Justin was my predecessor. And at the Ministry of Finance, Subbu is my successor. So this for me is sort of fitted between successor and predecessor. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. These are such difficult times, really, that we have to all stand together, pull in the best ideas possible. And we have to realize that no one quite knows what the right solutions are. So you have to recognize that and create that space and have the right intentions to take the agenda further forward. Since it was mentioned to me to make some comments on the IMF forecast about India, I will start with that and put it aside. IMF in the last World Economic Outlook had the growth forecast for India of 1.9% for this year, which is actually, compared to many other countries in this dismal scenario, they are forecasting minus 5.9 for United States, minus 6.5 for UK, 1.2 for China. So in the pecking order of things, not too bad. However, after that, IMF has given clarifications that it's probably going to do worse. And there can be no doubt that it will do worse. All over the world, growth is tanking. Growth will go into negative virtually all countries in the world. And it's unlikely that India will be an exception. India's lowest growth year was 1979-80, when India grew by minus 5.1%. So if we stay above that, then we haven't created a record, but this is a global situation and we have to deal with that. But for me, that's not the important thing, because what happens with the GDP focus is when it's a usual recession, everyone is being affected, you focus on the GDP. But really, in a pandemic-induced recession of the kind that we are heading into, it hits across the society in very different ways. And so for me right now, the concern must be not with the GDP, but with the poorest segments, the migrants caught out in the streets, trying to get home. Just think of the situation. And people, workers we now know that there's a massive amount of unemployment, people who are just managing a living. Our focus has to be on the poor, on the migrants, people who are trying to reach back home, reach some degree of safety. So for that, you have to be aware of the invisible hand, I'll come to that, of the private sector and everything. But the focus of attention has to be the poorest segment of the population. And one particular thing that has to be remembered is that COVID and death due to pandemic is very visible. Whereas usually suffering that comes from supply chains being broken down is a withering away. So those numbers get counted with a lag. And for that reason, we must not overlook the invisible suffering of people and be obsessed with the visible suffering. The first steps that India took, March 24th, 25th, India had to take. You have to get the population disciplined. You have to make sure that the COVID spreads as little as possible. But subsequently, we are learning things. A lot of data is coming over the last 2 months. So there is a lot of learning, and you have to begin to use that. One general problem across emerging economies is we have been a bit too obsessed with mimicking what is being done in Western countries, in Europe, in North America. And really, once you begin to look at the numbers carefully, it is very, very different, the situation across Africa, South Asia, even East Asia, including China. And I will make this point very soon. And also, to a lesser extent, Latin America. And the differences are so big that it will be a mistake if we mechanically follow European countries, North America, and try to outdo them in the kinds of policies they are following. Let me show you some numbers, the only one page I will show, which will, can I have this, Isha, on the screen? Yeah, okay, they are a bit faint. I don't know how clearly you're seeing, but I will explain this to you in one moment. Most of the European COVID numbers come in the form of population uncorrected numbers. So many people infected, so many people dying. But you have to keep in mind that a continent like Africa, 1.3 billion, a country like India, a country like China, massive populations, and it becomes meaningless if you don't do a population correction. So here is a little bit of data, all from very regular sources, of COVID deaths per 1 million population. When you make this correction, you will see in Belgium, for 1 million population, is 756. And the best performing European country, well, Finland is probably even better, but Germany is among the reasonably big countries doing very well, 95. So that's the range. Switch over to the countries that I was talking about. Let's first take on India. Whereas, let me keep Spain as a comparison point. Spain is 584 per million. In India, COVID deaths is 2 per million. There are people saying that maybe in India we are undercounting deaths. Make it 10 times that. Don't increase 10%, make it 10 times that. 2 will become 20. No comparison with 756. Even United States actually is much less than European countries, 1/3 almost, because it's a large population. And we are not doing these corrections in our heads. The thing about India is, if you go across Africa and Asia, the numbers are very similar. You think of China, because China took the first hit, all focus was on China. But once you make population corrections, India and China are actually pretty close. China's 3, India's 2, so China's 50% more, but India still has some distance to go, and China also may get it again. We have Bangladesh's 2, Ethiopia is less than all of us, and in fact, most African countries are 2, South Africa's high at 3. This has to be kept in mind. Now, many people will say, and this is at one level, if you are a leading global figure, you want to warn developing countries that, look, you may be at the foothills of a big climb. So you have to keep the worst case scenario in mind, but you can't allow that to cause yourself to be locked down for 3 months, 4 months altogether, because these risks are always there. And when the differences are so big, you have to take that into account and work with it. I can do without this page here onwards. So you can just remove that, keep those numbers tucked away in your head. So what from here onwards, really a lot will depend on the exit strategy. Let me tell you, overall, I remain very optimistic for India. India's growth was slowing down even before the pandemic. It was being written about. So there were worries there. But the long run, I am optimistic about India for a variety of reasons, but I'll give you just one. I'll put it on the table and put it aside. I feel when the world re-emerges from this, the 2 sectors that will be the front runners is going to be the health sector. Globally, is going to be a much larger sector. India has initial advantages on that. We can pick that up. I feel the outsourcing business, after all the hyper-nationalism and all dies down, and I think it will die down quickly after the pandemic because of the pressures of global competition, outsourcing information technology will be big. So there are big scopes, but we can mess things up. Let's keep that in mind, that this is a very challenging time ahead for us, and I just want to focus on the steps ahead. What we were very worried about, that India needs to spend more money, but the announcement that 10% of the GDP is the stimulus package, which was announced a few days ago by the Prime Minister, is a very welcome package. There are people who are sort of going through these numbers very carefully and saying that 10% is not really additional 10%, it will be 5%. But even if it is really 5%, actually that is a lot of money. We were at 1%, we've suddenly stepped it up. So I feel the money that is being put up for this is a good move, but that's the necessary move, the first move, but nowhere near enough. And that's where the task ahead is. We have to burrow in and see how this money is going to be spent and what do we do with it. And everything will depend on that. And I feel over the next 1 month, 1.5 months, global investment capital businesses will pick countries where they will invest, sink in big businesses. China could revive once again. Vietnam is a very attractive destination. Thailand is an attractive destination. Mexico is beginning to pick up something. India has a treacherous 1-2 months ahead, and we have to deal with this carefully. If we do spend a big amount of money, 5%, 6% of GDP for a fiscal stimulus, our budget deficit is going to grow. The fiscal deficit, more importantly, the fiscal deficit will grow. We will breach our FRBM Act 2003 limits. To me, that is fine. This is a time when we will have to allow the deficit to increase. And the money that the Prime Minister has allocated for this, I also want to emphasize that the big responsibility for this has to be in the fiscal department. So in other words, and we have to use monetary policy, but really as a complement and just a little bit, because you don't want to infuse too much liquidity into the system. So in short, the main responsibility for the use of this is with people like Subbu here, Subhash Garg, Minister Sitaraman, and from the sidelines, really not the principal responsibility, but from the sidelines, we can't overuse that, the Shaktikanta Das and the Reserve Bank of India. That's going to be the package to take this ahead. There is one fear being expressed repeatedly. The rating agencies will downgrade India if the deficit increases. To that, I have to say, I have dealt with, when I was in the government, I would deal with the rating agencies all the time. We cannot allow India to be held ransom by rating agencies. And we have to take a little bit of risk. This has to be done in a very careful way, but we cannot be ransom to rating agencies. And let me point out that at times, what the rating agency attempts backfires in some ways. For me, the most memorable time was when I was actually doing exactly the work that Subbu's doing. 5th of August 2011, Standard & Poor's downgraded United States from AAA to AA, and United States being downgraded was global news. But what we saw after that for a couple of weeks, with a little bit of lag, money was flowing back into United States. So I feel the fear of rating agencies, we must not overdo. I feel very disappointed that they have downgraded South Africa, where I think Cyril Ramaphosa is doing an impressive job in Africa. To my mind, it's Ramaphosa and Abiy Ahmed who are doing impressive jobs in Ethiopia and in respectively South Africa and Ethiopia. And South Africa has been downgraded, very unfortunate, but we'll have to live with that. The wind down, just a couple of words on how we need to do the wind down, and that is the important thing. You know, in India, people got fixated on the one word lockdown, but a lockdown has many, many dimensions to it. And now we have to work through this and go for a curated lockdown. Couple of sectors we have to open up, and we have to live with the fact that there'll be a little more risk of COVID, but we are way in the foothills of Europe and North America. So we have to take that chance a little bit. Kinds of things that we should do is we will have to keep a restriction on large gatherings. There is no choice on that. We will probably have to, and this I say with a big dilemma, keep schools closed for another 3 weeks, 1 month, and say that we will take stock of things in middle of June and make announcements. It is very damaging for children, and we will have to soon devise rules by which you can open up, but maybe for another month more. So a couple of these rules will have to remain, but other things we will have to begin to open up. Factories will have to begin to function. We will have to enable workers to move, and for that transportation has to be opened up, workers to move, the managers to move, and we have seen regions and economies which have used lots of intricate mechanisms to get movement going. In Taiwan, I'm told that in trains, they are dropping screens in very small segments so that groups don't interact with one another. In domestic planes, if you make the rule that alternate seats have to be empty, I feel it'll still be viable for airlines because airfares will go up because they are using alternate seats empty, airfares will go up. At this point of time, it's better to allow for that and allow some movement of people than not do that at all. Local transportation workers need to come and go. We have to open up, and testing, which is being talked about, testing not for the sake of testing, but testing to allow us to curate the opening up of the economy so that the market economy is functioning, which is what we need to do. And I'm ending up with what Louis talked about, reminding that I have been talking about this quite a bit. You know, the invisible hand of the market is usually it is economists who talk about, and normally I'm on the other side reminding people that don't overdo the story of the invisible hand. The invisible hand has a big role, but the regulations and the state and the government also has a role. But I have been speaking from the other side, but I should tell Louis, I have not changed my position at all, but the world has shifted over to the other side. So what I'm saying is sounding as though I have changed my position. It's just a reminder that the market is such a complex creature that if you try to control it altogether and say that the bureaucrats and the government, we will reach everything to whoever needs what and keep the market closed, we will not manage that. And there is a bit of a global fear that a whole lot of economies in Africa and Asia will become closed and controlled in trying to control the pandemic. We must not do that. We have to allow the invisible hand to function. And this is a professional job. And I'm really glad that Subbu's here with us. Justin, we will hear about China. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address.
Louis, we can't hear
Subbu,
you.
yeah, Subbu, sorry. Thanks a lot, Kaushik. And Subbu, can you join in now?
Yeah, very good morning to all the participants. It's quite a job to say anything after Dr. Basu has, made his remarks. But as he rightly said, as his successor, I think I can actually build on, even in this short session, what he's talked about. I think some of the points that he's made are excellent. What I will actually use a different benchmark to try and think about the same event. Before I talk about it, one of the aspects that I do want to bring to the attention of all the participants is a bias that behavioral economics really highlights. If you read the book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, which is a book that I highly recommend for all the participants, he talks about what is called saliency bias, which is the fact that we overweight, recent evidence and typically underweight evidence that is a little bit in the past. So for instance, one exemplification of that would be that when we are in normal times, we do not factor in the possibility of a black swan event. We don't think that that is quite likely. In contrast, once we are in a black swan event, then we tend to act back to normal times as well. And therefore, there can be a lot of pessimism that can get built in. And that's not unexpected, especially in times like these when fear is also an important emotion which is driving, and all of us analysts and economists are also humans finally. So the combination of fear plus the saliency bias can make us more pessimistic in our predictions and in our judgments. I just want to warn you against that, sort of getting subjected to that bias. The reason I say that is, let's take a look at a pandemic that was almost similar, the Spanish flu episode of 1918. Because it's a pandemic, one of the I'll come to this slide a little later, Mani. Actually, if you can just take out the slide for a minute. So if you look at the Spanish flu episode, one of the parameters that is used to understand how bad the pandemic is this parameter called R0, which captures if the likelihood of the number of people who are likely to be infected by an infected person. If you take the Spanish flu, and this is numbers that have been estimated by Larry Brilliant, the epidemiologist researcher who actually also worked with the movie Contagion, which, by the way, I highly recommend for those of you who've not seen it yet. So he estimates the R0 parameter for the Spanish flu to be 2.2, 2.3, and that for COVID to be 2.4. And just to give you a contrast, how close this parameter is for the Spanish flu vis-a-vis COVID versus other pandemics, the influenza that comes every year has an R0 of about 1.2, 1.3, so much lower. In contrast, pandemics like Ebola or smallpox have an R0 which is in excess of 3.5. So far worse in terms of the rate of infection that can happen. So from a pandemic perspective, the Spanish flu is a good proxy to use. Now, in this, and if the slide could be now brought in, Lakshmi. So if you look at one of the key aspects, all of us have, I think, read about it, recognize that in the short run, there is this trade-off between flattening the pandemic, the effect of the pandemic by basically, giving ourselves time, and the economic impact. And I think, across countries, we've actually seen that trade-off play out in the last couple of months. But do remember that a few months is the short run. This particular chart, I think, is important if we have to look at the long-run implications of the measures that are taken to try and save lives. So what is being plotted here is on the x-axis, the mortality rate, exactly the way Dr. Kaushik Basu showed. Here it is being shown per 100,000 people. He showed it for 1 million. So on the x-axis, what you see is mortality rates in the Spanish flu for the various counties in the United States. And what you see on the y-axis is the change in employment, using from 1914 to 1919. There was, remember, the Spanish flu episode was by far the most devastating in 1918. One more key parameter, just to give you a, to compare Spanish flu with COVID. In the Spanish flu, 1/3 of the entire global population was infected. 1/3. In contrast, today, globally, less than 1% of the population is infected. So about 30 times higher in terms of the infection. Second, if you look at the rate of mortality, the mortality rate in the Spanish flu episode was 10%, about 10%, while global average is about 3.4%. And some countries are actually greater, others are lower. But so even if you look at the rate of mortality, 1/3, rate of infection about 1/30th or 1/33rd. So in terms of the pandemic, the COVID episode is far less devastating, at least at this point. And I actually say this, I'm looking for wood to touch wood, let it remain like that. But it's at this point in time is still, a far less devastating episode. And that is why it is important to keep in mind, because even in the Spanish flu, if you look at the global economy and the US economy, there was a V-shaped recovery. What I mean by that is actually there was a decline in output, in the year when the pandemic was bad. But after that, there was a significant, pickup. For instance, the United States had a 3.5% decline in the year 1918, and then had a 7.5% pickup, growth, in 1919. So this V-shaped pattern prevailed. This is really important for us to remember that we don't get subject to saliency bias and just put too much weight on what is happening now. Do incorporate the evidence from 100 years back of this V-shaped. And here in the V-shaped recovery, this slide is very important. And I come back to this slide. I just took some important comment that I had to make. So if you see this particular slide, you see red dots and green dots. Now, these red dots versus green dots are about the difference in the non-pharmaceutical intervention that was undertaken by different counties. What do we mean by non-pharmaceutical intervention? These are basically school closures, theater closures, shopping areas being closed, etc. The lockdown is basically a much more stringent or an extreme form of these non-pharmaceutical interventions. So now, if there are two key takeaways from this particular slide, one, you notice that those, on average, those counties where the mortality rate was lower, were the ones where the increase in employment actually was greater. In other words, an expression that the Prime Minister used, "Jaan hai to jahan hai," which is this evidence shows that if the mortality rate was lower, then in the long run, when you look at over a 2-year period or so, 1918, 1919, employment actually was created more. But more importantly, when you look at the green versus the red dots, what you see is that the red dots are more to the right. In other words, these are counties where the mortality rate was higher. And these are also counties where the increase in employment was lower. When you contrast that with the green dots, it's very clear. These were the dots where the mortality rate was, the red dots where mortality rates were higher and the employment was lower. Green dots are ones where the mortality rate was lower and the increase in employment was greater. In other words, this trade-off that we worry about in the short run did not seem to manifest in the medium to long run in a couple of years. And this is a very important point. This is an NBR, National Bureau of Economic Research paper that has actually just recently come out a couple of months back. So it's important to keep this in mind, and in that sense, I think I will build therefore on what and we can now take out this particular slide. We need to go ahead and do graded lockdowns. So the lockdown, the non-pharmaceutical interventions that I showed in this chart, it did not involve the kind of really, a really stringent lockdown. So we could mimic that, going forward. And I think lockdown 4 is going to be very different in India compared to the other. Let me just, add a few more things on the policy dimension that we are working on. How am I doing on time, Louis?
We've got about 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay.
Two and a half. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the key aspects, and I think the migrant workers, for instance, was mentioned. For migrant workers, one of the key problems they face is that they fall between the cracks, especially in their access to food grains through the National Food Security Act. The one nation, one ration card, I think, together with free meals for the next 2 months, I think will help substantially. But there's a bigger point that we have to work on, when we think about migrant labor. Migrant labor is actually a part of the very large informal sector workforce that we have in India. 11% of the labor force is in the formal sector, 89% in the informal sector. And this is not an accident. This has happened partly, at least, because of the very stringent labor regulations that we've created. We wrote about this in detail in the July 2019 economic survey, where because of the kind of regulations, for instance, if you're a firm that is greater than 100 employees, then you have to do a lot more compliance. So entrepreneurs endogenously choose to then be at sizes less than 100 employees. So these are the kind of, and they choose to be in the informal sector because the requirements of compliance and other aspects, regulation, are far greater in the formal sector. So one of the key things, and this is what actually the government has been emphasizing, one of the key takeaways once the dust settles, on this package, will be the significant reforms that will be carried out. This is in some sense the 1991 moment for India now, and you instead of looking at the crisis as a crisis, we're looking at that as an opportunity. For instance, the labor reforms that are being undertaken in several states, one can argue about actually whether the calibration needs to be a little bit more fine-tuned, etc. But it is actually very important. The APMC product market reforms, Louis, I'll be done in 1 minute. The product market reforms, which have been really, long-standing for almost 7 decades. The Essential Commodities Acts, which is something that acts as a deterrent to infrastructure creation on storage and other aspects. You will also hear about a bunch of other reforms on the, when the finance minister spoke about. So one of the key things that will stand out, in the government's response to this particular crisis is to look at this as an opportunity to try and reset and especially work on enhancing productivity. And I'll end with the last comment actually on, the Chinese Premier Deng Xiaoping, would remark, and I'm sure Justin would, if I'm wrong, correct me, would remark that, I don't care about the color of the cat as long as it catches mice. Now, when you think about actually the fiscal versus monetary versus liquidity measures, at this point in time, once we have to reach the various stakeholders, provide them benefits, we will basically, I think it's smart policy to utilize where space is greater. At this point in time, fiscal space has been a little lower, but the point that Dr. Basu made, I think, is well taken. Maybe this is the time to actually, to not worry about it that much. But as of now, we basically have exploited the space. About 8.5 trillion rupees of money of banks sits with the Reserve Bank through the reverse repo operations. So that basically tells you about the liquidity that is there. So we have utilized that. We will continue to be, to recalibrate. This is a period of significant uncertainty, what economists called unknown unknowns. And, whether it's employment or some of the distress, it's being felt globally. For instance, the United States has, the number of unemployment insurance claims have actually been historically high, greater than that in the Depression as well. So we will continue to recalibrate and come up with policy responses as required to ensure that the distress remains the lowest. I'll stop there and be happy to actually say more, take questions or give color during that time.
Thanks, Subbu. And Justin, over to you to talk about what we can learn from the Chinese story.
Okay, it's a great honor for me to participate in this session together with my good friends and to discuss the lessons from China's experiences for achieving inclusive growth in India and other countries. And according to the assignment, the first question to me is, how could China make such impressive achievement? Because in the past 40 years, the 70% of the poverty reduction in the world came from China. And if we look back, in 1978, the per capita GDP in China was 156 US dollars. And at that time, India, 204 US dollars. So the per capita GDP in China was 30% lower than India's. But in the past 41 years, since 1978, China achieved average 9.3% growth continuously. And last year, the per capita GDP in China was 10,100. And what makes this kind of rapid growth to be sustained for such a long time? Certainly, as economists, we need to understand the mechanism of the economic growth. The mechanism of economic growth, on the one hand, certainly is a stream of technological innovation and a continuous industrial upgrading. And this mechanism certainly is the same for a developing country or for a developed country. But there's a difference between developing country and a developed country. The developed country, their technology, their industry are on the global frontier. If they want to technological innovation or industrial upgrading, they would have to invent the new technology or new industry. And from the historical experience that we see, for the advanced country, on the average, they can grow around 3% per year by this mechanism. And for a developing country, we have lower income. That means we have some kind of latecomers advantages on the process of technological innovation or industrial upgrading. We can learn from the advanced country to get new technology to upgrade industry. And this latecomers advantages enable a developing country to grow much faster. But how much? And since the Second World War, there were certain economies. By relying on the latecomers advantages, they achieved 7% or more growth rate and continuously for 25 or more years. After 1978, the reform and opening up started by Deng Xiaoping, China became one of those 13 economies. So my answer to the first question, how China can be so successful, it is because China tapped into the potential of the latecomers advantages. Then people ask, latecomers advantage has been there before 1978, but how come China was so poor at the time? Well, it was because before 1978, China, like India, adopted a wrong strategy. The strategy tried to accelerate the growth of heavy industry or some kind of heavy industry oriented development strategies. Heavy industry was capital intensive. And at that time, it was on the global frontiers. And by that kind of strategies, it went against China's competitive advantages. On the one hand, because those kind of technology was on the global frontiers, you cannot benefit from the latecomer advantages. And on the other hand, it went against the country's competitive advantages. So those kind of development would have to be implemented with all kind of government support, distortion, and so on. And as a result, although the latecomer advantage was there, but China could not grow fast. And I think that from this analysis, it's a good news for India. As long as India can, develop your economy according to your competitive advantages to tap into the potential of latecomer advantages, I think India in the coming years can achieve similar performance as China did in the past 40 years. But recently, there's a lot of hypotheses about coming collapse of the Chinese economy. In fact, in the past 40 years, those kind of prediction has been around many times, but each time, it proved to be wrong. But this time it seems to be very convincing because, in the past 9 years, the growth rate in China dropped year by year. For example, in 2010, the growth rate was 10.6%. And last year, the growth rate was 6.1%. And 6.1% was the lowest ever growth rate since 1990s. And not only so, it was the first time for China to have a 9-year continuously deceleration of the growth. And so many people say, well, it was because of all kind of internal problem that China, carried with it. And so the growth cannot be sustained. And they can point to all kind of structural problem. For example, China still have a large share of state-owned enterprises, very inefficient. China is encounter aging. China have high leverage and so on. And they thought that was the reason for China to have this kind of continual deceleration, and Chinese economy is going to crash. Well, I have to acknowledge all those problems they mentioned that were there. But those kind of problems has been there for a long time. It was not the first time for China to encounter those kind of problems. And my position is that the deceleration since 2010, it was mainly external causes. And how to prove that? We can look into the performance of other BRIC countries. In the same level of development, and they exactly the same like China, started to have a deceleration of their growth since 2010. For example, India, in 2010, the growth rate was 10.3%. Last year, 4.2%. And we can also look into Russia. 2010, the growth rate was 4.5%, and last year, 1.3%. Brazil, 2010, its growth rate was 7.3%. Last year, 1.1%. And the other BRIC country, they did not have those kind of structural problems that China had. For example, state-owned enterprises or aging and so on. But they have exactly the same pattern of the deceleration. They must come from a similar external causes. And I think the main reason was the high-income country have not fully recovered from the 2008 crisis. And it had an impact on the international trade, on the external demand, and that was the main reason for the deterioration of this BRIC country. And if that was the main reason for the deterioration, then where Chinese economy continued to decline and come into crash. I think it all depends on whether China still have internal sources of growth. And for the internal sources of growth, I think if you look into the growth potential, Japan, Korea, Singapore, they at a similar level of income. And the gap with the US, the advanced country, that's a measurement of their net commercial advantages. They all grow at about 8 to 10% for about 20 years. So that means that the growth potential in China should be still about 8%, the growth potential. And external demand certainly declined because of the sluggish in the high-income country, and China can rely on the internal source of growth. But if you look into the internal source of growth, one is potential, the other one is ability to tap into the potential. And you know that China, the government fiscal position is very strong. Its total accumulated debt was less than 60% of GDP. So China can use fiscal stimulus if necessary. And also the saving rate in China is as high as about 45% of GDP per year. So China can still count on the stimulus to leverage the private sector's investment, and that will create jobs and increase household income, so the consumption will continue to grow. So I think that China can still maintain a reasonably high growth rate, around 6% or more or less. Then, then certainly China still have a lot of structural problems, as I said. And especially China, in the transition process, adopted some kind of gradual, piecemeal, dual-track approach. China did not adopt the Washington Consensus, try to remove all the distortion inherited from the heavy industry-oriented development strategy regime. And during the reform process, China continued to remove some of the distortion, but there's still some distortion remain, because currently in the commodity, in the goods market, that has been liberalized fully. But in the factor market, still repressed. For example, financial sectors, we still have financial repression. We still have limitation of the labor mobility through the household registration system and so on. So I think in the coming year, China need to remove those kind of distortion in the factor markets in order to complete the transition to a well-functioning markets. And this including financial sector reform, liberalize the interest rate control, and also improve the financial structure, and also also the remove the household registration system which limit labor mobility. And lastly, about COVID. China the first one to be hit, but China almost get out of the COVID. In the first quarter, the growth rate dropped 6.8%. And so the year's growth will depend on the second quarter, third quarter, and the fourth quarter. But overall, since China already move out of the COVID impact, and I think this year, China is likely to grow at about 3 to 4%. So let me stop here and be happy to take other questions if you have.
Thanks a lot, Justin. So we've had a great set of discussions, and unfortunately, we've extended a bit of our time. So we're going to restrict the opportunity to ask questions, but the one which has received the maximum vote so far is this question from Daksha. How do we account for cost of production of natural resources so that we shift to economics of sustainability in renewable systems like Earth? all three of you are welcome to talk about this. Anyone wants to go first?
I can respond
Sure.
to it.
Thank you.
I think that's a very good question. Conceptually, one can basically think about the incorporating the idea of the opportunity cost, but it will have to incorporate some aspects of climate change, due to economic activity in framing that the cost of natural resources. I think if you in India, during the lockdown period, we've seen a natural experiment that shows that scaling down economic activity at least a little bit can have very beneficial effects on climate. For instance, the Ganges, which is a river that is venerated across India, has become so clean just in the space of a few weeks, because the industrial effluents are not coming into it. So I think it's a very nice question, which we should think about incorporating it into our cost of capital calculations. And I think by taking the idea of the opportunity cost and adding elements to it of climate change, we can really, concretize that idea.
Thank you.
Can I throw in a remark on that, Louis?
Sure, of course.
The cost benefit analysis of the resource is one part of it, but actually I'm just seconding what Subbu is showing that we've picked up a couple of indicators in this dramatic moment, which is a bit of a reminder that by cutting down some conventional consumption and redirecting our nature of consumption, we can live much better lives when this dreadful time is over. And really the reminder is, you don't have to consume less. It's the content of your consumption. Instead of just more cars and more homes, if we consume a little bit more of trying to consume better health, even better reading, better development of the mind, all these things need resources. And it is a reminder to us that this is a dramatic moment. We have to come out of this with some lessons that let us change the nature of our consumption from the guzzling of durable goods that we tend to do to a more sustainable world. So in that spirit, I take the question to be a very worthwhile one.
Thank you. Justin, China's also seen huge changes and improvements in the environment. What do you have to say about this?
Well, certainly, China need to do that because China is a continental, like India, a continental country. And a lot of the externalities from the production or consumption will be internalized. And so under the kind of system, certainly we need to, really look into the opportunity cost, not only now, but also in the future. And so like now the environmental, and we need to go green, and the government is promoting the green technology, and the government is also, provide incentive for the firms and family and the household to use green technology in their consumption and in their production.
Okay. I got one more question from Srichand Sheshadri. We've got 3 minutes to respond, so each of you have a minute. A lot of commentary has been published about how the financial markets in India have been long due for a correction, especially given transmitting liquidity in the economy has been a concern with balance sheet problems in the banking system. Do the panelists share the same concern during and after COVID?
I can take that.
Thank you.
So while I do concede that the Indian economy is going into this COVID episode with worse initial conditions on the financial sector compared to other economies, it is also pertinent to that if we look at the overall debt to GDP ratios for India vis-a-vis some of the all G20 economies, whether we split it into G20 OECD economies or G20 BRICS economies, India has by the lowest debt to GDP ratio at about 129%, with I think next country, if I remember right, is Mexico at about 188 odd percent. So every other country has their debt to GDP ratios are either 200% or more. Now, within that as well, if you look at, so India is by far the lowest in terms of the overall debt to GDP ratio, which includes both general government debt and private sector debt. But there's an interesting configuration there, which is that our government to debt, when we look at that, we are at the median of the G20 economies. What that implies then is our private sector debt is actually far lower, which is also, by the way, a parenthetical remark that there is crowding out of private sector. But from the perspective of the financial sector, if you think about a counterfactual, if we had far too much private sector debt, and you had a financial sector which basically was not extending enough credit and was let's say in a logjam, then the problem would have been far more exacerbated going into this episode. So I think that is in some sense a saving grace at this point in time, that our private sector credit is actually lower. But it also tells us that we need to move far more into sort of inclusive credit to, especially at the bottom of the pyramid, and the MSMEs, etc. I would just say that I think some of the measures on MSMEs, especially the change in the definition, I think can play an important role in that regard.
Kaushik,
can I add a minute remark to this? The balance sheet problem, the reason I would be cautious and worried about this is I do believe that 6 months, 1 year from now, inflation is going to pick up all over the world. So much liquidity infusion is taking place across the world. It's a bit reminiscent of 2008. And today we live in a globalized world. So America infuses liquidity, it sloshes all over the world. So we have to be very cautious on the banking sector, simply because there will be a problem on hand, which all countries will have to face about 1 year from now, which is inflation is going to pick up. But I think overall we are strong enough. We should be able to manage. That has to be kept in mind.
So, okay, thank you. I'm going to sort of now wrap up because we're going to get shut out otherwise. And 3 brief comments. From Kaushik, I've taken the point that we shouldn't worry too much about the rating agencies. From Subbu, I gather that there's going to be a lot more changes in areas including labor laws. And from Justin, India has the latecomer advantage and we should grab that. Thanks a lot to all 3 of you for a very engaging hour. And I look forward to catching up again. Thank you. And thanks a lot to Nudge Foundation.
Thank you.
Thanks to the Nudge Foundation. And I must say, I enjoyed it very much with the other co-panelists.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful.
I really enjoyed the discussions and I hope to see you in person in other occasions. Thank you.
Yeah. Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you, Louis, and our panelists. And this has been a great discussion. Thank you so much for sharing so many insights on how policymakers might approach decision-making in these really extraordinary times. We have back-to-back plenary sessions today morning, and I see that our guests for the next session are already here. Jayesh Parekh, Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, and Binny Bansal. Welcome. I also invite our current panelists to join us for the session. If your time permits, you're most welcome to join us. We're going to shift gears. We're actually going to shift from the macro lens to how individuals might approach situations like this. Our next keynote plenary is, what shall I do with all my money? We have with us Jayesh Parekh, co-founder of Sony Entertainment Television. He's also now an advisor board member to several organizations, including Jungle Ventures, Avishkar, Sanctum Wealth Management, One Animation, and Milap. Jayesh is also co-producer of Jalki, a film inspired by Nobel Prize winner Kailash Satyarthi. Jayesh recently produced a book titled, What Shall We Do with All This Money? And it is in this context that he will be speaking to our next guests for the session, Kiran and Binny. Jayesh, very warm welcome to Charcha 2020, and over to you for the session.
Thank you so much, Lakshmi. And I want to first thank Atul, Shatija, and Nudge for inviting me to host the next 1 hour at Charcha 2020, which, as I understand, has been attended by over 15,000 people from 50 countries on Zoom and on YouTube. So we will be spending the next 1 hour chatting with 2 amazing and successful entrepreneurs. So just as a background, I'm originally from Calcutta, and now what it is called is Kolkata. And I compiled this book of interviews which is what shall we do with all this money? So it's inspiring perspectives on money, essentially. So I'm just making sure that my video can be seen, because I can't see my own video. So this book, What Shall We Do With All This Money, is basically a compilation of interviews with over 50 heroes and unsung heroes, men and women of Indian diaspora worldwide, from USA, UK, Africa, Middle East, Singapore, Malaysia, India, folks like Mr. Ratan Tata, Amit Chandra, Rohini Nilekani, Vineet Rai, Vikram Gandhi, Professor Jagdish Sheth, Shekhar Kapoor, Sanjeev Bikhchandani, Mohandas Pai, Om Swami, Deepak Chopra, and many others. You can check out the book at allthismoney.com. And at the end of the chat, we will come back again to the book. And that brings me to the topic today, which is a twist from the title of the book, which is What Shall I Do With All This Money? And today, my first guest is the well-known billionaire entrepreneur, Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, chairperson and founder of Biocon. Welcome, Kiran. And Kiran, as we have folks from all over the world tuning in, may I please request you to just briefly tell us the milestones that brought you here? Can I introduce yourself, please? Thank you.
Well, I call myself an accidental entrepreneur because I never planned to start my own company. I came back as a trained brewmaster and I couldn't find a job. And it was an accidental encounter that got me to start Biocon over 40 years ago. And my journey has been one of challenges, one of building credibility. And of course, it's been a very exciting journey, building a biotech company, in fact, India's first biotech company, and bringing it to the stage it is today. Obviously, my eureka moment was when I listed Biocon in 2004, when all of a sudden it made me realize that I had created a huge amount of value and that I was now being called India's richest woman. And that is when I realized that it is not about money, it's about value, and it's about wealth creation for making a difference. And that's when I started my very philanthropic journey as well, because it was then that I realized that my late father had said to me at one stage that money is not a currency with which to buy favors, but it is a currency with which to make a difference. And those words stayed with me forever. And that is what money means to me. How do I make a difference? How do I basically, include people who are not as fortunate as me to participate in wealth creation?
Well, thank you so much for that. And so can you just expand a little bit on your perspective on wealth as you were growing up, and then how has that transformed today?
Like I said, when I was growing up, I grew up in a middle-class family. And I think all of us were taught very important values in life. My late father, who was a great influence on me, always said to me, every person has strengths and weaknesses. Focus on the strengths. Every person needs to be looked at in terms of how do we, collaborate. And he also said to me that, it's important for us to remember that everyone is not as fortunate as us, especially in a country like India. And, one particular anecdote, which actually refers to that little quote that I mentioned previously, was about when I failed to get into medical college. And when I said to my dad, why don't you buy a seat for me? That's when he said to me, listen, money is not a currency to buy favors. It is a currency to make a difference. And please understand, the most important value is, make sure that you always build credibility and that you aspire to, you aspire for things which are genuine and honestly achieved. So have that honesty of purpose. So those were some of the early growing up values which I imbibed. and which is something which I still believe in very, very strongly.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And so that brings me to our current topic, which is what shall I do with all this money? And so, obviously all our listeners, we would love to get your thoughts on allocation of wealth from your vantage point.
As I said, for me, philanthropy has been very entwined in my purpose of life. Okay, my purposeful mission in life has been very philanthropic. So yes, I have managed to create a lot of wealth and value. Of course, a lot of that is notional wealth because it's always tied with what your value of your company is all about. What is your market cap of your company is about. But I think more than anything else, I've, as you know, taken the giving pledge, which means that I want to really make sure that half my wealth is given to philanthropy. And when I started creating wealth and when I started realizing that I had wealth at my disposal, the first thing I did was, what can I do to make a difference? And the first thing I did was build a cancer center, because I felt that this was very, very important for a country like India. And that is my first act of philanthropy, where I built a 1,000-bedded medical center, cancer hospital, in partnership with Dr. Devi Shetty. My philanthropy is very directed towards healthcare, higher education, primary healthcare, and art and culture. I have very varied interests in supporting various causes. And for me, it started with building that hospital. And of course, it was also very important that as a part of that hospital, I wanted to create a translational research center, which I did. And then later on, I started, supporting higher education at MIT, at Sloan Kettering, at Glasgow University, so that people from India, researchers from India, could have the opportunity to pursue advanced research and come back to India and start their own labs. And I'm very happy that this is working, because one of the first few recipients of my fellowship at MIT has actually started a bioengineering lab at IISc in Bangalore. So I think these kind of things are extremely important for me. How do I make a difference? How do I value add? Of course, I've also participated and one of the founding patrons of the Museum of Art and Photography in Bangalore, because I feel that we need to also support art. So, these are the ways I have really used my philanthropy in education, in healthcare, in art and culture. And of course, I also spontaneously come forward at a time of adversity like this, where obviously I have also donated to various causes which are about COVID response.
Okay, so we'll come back to that in a second. But Kiran, can you just help us a little bit as we struggle through this giving? So, a lot of people who are from business background like you, entrepreneur, we sweat a lot on outcome management in our business. How do you do when you are giving? And are you always looking at outcome measurement, or are you also enjoying the journey? Is there a journey in it? Is there an emotion in it?
More than outcome, I think I want to assess impact. Okay, am I making impact? Is my philanthropy making impact? You see, it's very clinical and very business-like to constantly focus on outcome. But to me, impact is a much bigger factor. So for instance, the hospital that I built, is it making impact? It is making impact, because when I come to the hospital and I see thousands of people in the outpatient department and all the wards being occupied, I think I can see I'm making impact. I don't want to come and see, I don't want to measure the actual outcome, because that is for the hospital to do, right? The hospital has a business model. My view is, am I making impact? Am I providing affordable access to patients who need these kind of treatments? Are we in a position to give very cutting edge advanced treatments to these patients? And those are the kind of things I look for.
Okay, but is there a personal journey in the Is there a personal journey as well in this?
Of course there is. Of course there is, because everything is something which is very close to what I believe in. It is, and that is why I support these kind of initiatives, because it's something that inspires me, something that excites me, something that I want to be a part of.
Okay, and so now coming to the current situation, which is, what I say that is there's a massive need of the hour. And Kiran, all of us are struggling with this, and maybe I can ask you for your insight on how do you find the balance between calamity giving, which is sort of the need of the hour now, versus sustainable development, right, or long-term goals?
I think, you have to find your balance. I think at a time of adversity, you have to respond. And when there is no adversity, you have to believe in some sustainable goals. For me, universal healthcare is my eventual goal in supporting primary healthcare and supporting tertiary healthcare in the way I'm doing. For me, the ultimate goal is to look at innovation and to look at research-driven and science-driven thinking. But at a time of adversity, you will support science that can address this adversity. So I'm supporting a lot of research and startups who are coming up with innovative ideas. I've also, participated in ACT, which is again a fund that is basically looking at COVID solutions. So I think all of us have to balance between a spontaneous philanthropic act at a time of adversity, which is an acute philanthropic act, and then a sustainable, more long-term kind of, philanthropic, effort, which is sustainable and which you believe in. So if you believe in things like environmental sustainability, then that's what you should be also focusing on long term. Nothing happens in a short term. So whether it is healthcare, whether it's environmental sustainability, whether it's education, I think you have to understand that these are long-term efforts. It cannot happen on a year-on-year basis. It cannot happen like in business on a quarter-by-quarter kind of evaluation. So I think some of them need long-term investments, some of them need perpetual investments, and some of them require acute kind of initiatives, something like this, where when COVID strikes, all of us have to do something. So, whether it is about supporting the procurement of PPEs or ventilators or masks, or whether it is supporting research that is finding a vaccine or a diagnostic test or a therapeutic. I think this is the way I look at it.
Okay, great. And so do you also have a formula on how do you allocate at all between grants, which is basically giving to nonprofits, versus, let's say, for example, microfinance, micro-lending, and impact investment, where you invest in social enterprises?
My way of investing is really it depends on what the whole opportunity is or what the grant is about. So I'm basically focusing a lot on grant-based, kind of philanthropy. I have invested a little bit in social enterprise from time to time, but most of my philanthropy is based on grants, because I believe that these grants have to address a certain minimal expectations. And most of these grantees are able to assure me that it will be, put to good use. So if I, and then I don't have to really worry, except for making sure that I track what that grant is being used for and the impact it is making. So that's, for me, the easier way of doing it. And of course, I have worked with NGOs. Of course, I do invest in many important initiatives that have been started by NGOs. So I would say 70% of my philanthropy is in grants, and the other 25% is also grants, but in sort of the NGO region, NGO area.
Okay, and so you touched upon the fact that you have participated and committed to the Giving Pledge, which was spearheaded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, wherein you pledged to dedicate 50% of your wealth to giving back. And it's similar to Living My Promise. It's an initiative 2 and 4 in India. Can you just give us some insights on this giving pledge?
Well, basically, it's a pledge basically to create a league of philanthropists, basically a worldwide league of philanthropists who basically want to basically influence others to join this mission. Because like you said, your own book is about what do I do with all this money? And I think basically the giving pledge also wants to make people understand that, their money needs to be put to better use. And so you can use your money not on yourself, but on more philanthropic kind of initiatives. And there is such a growing league of such philanthropists in the world. And I think it inspires you to be part of it because you learn a lot from what each other is doing. And I find that the Giving Pledge conferences that we have, the gatherings that we have annually allows you to basically talk to others, find out what others are doing. You learn so many different ways of giving. And I think that's very inspiring. And of course, there are call-out sessions where, depending on what area you're interested in, you can actually learn a lot more about some of these specific areas of philanthropy. So I have met very fascinating people just being part of Giving Pledge. And then we also have started the India Philanthropy Initiative as an India-specific Giving Pledge kind of model, along with Azim Premji and Nandan and Rohini Nilekani and Jamshed Godrej and many others. And I think that is also growing now because we feel Indians have been culturally very philanthropic, but we need to get the younger generation to really think about being philanthropic from the very early stages.
Okay, good. And thank you so much. There are a few questions that are popping up and I'll try to ask them, but I have the first question on that list, which is, because of your background, we would all be very interested to know if you have comments on the COVID-19 vaccine or drugs development, how it's going. I mean, we hear so much stuff, it's just floating all over the place. So we wanted some really insight from you.
So I've been very involved in this whole area, as you can imagine. And, the government, the Department of Biotechnology has recently asked me to chair the National Biomedical Resource Indigenization Consortium, which is very exciting because I get to know firsthand all that is happening in the country. And I can tell you it's very exciting and a lot of very important, innovative ideas are coming to the fore. And we're beginning to create a platform where people can collaborate. We are seeing a large number of companies who are capable of developing very, very innovative serological tests, which are far more, dependable and accurate than some of the tests that have been, criticized. We're looking at Indian companies diving into vaccine development. I've been talking to companies like Bharat Biotech and Biological-E, and of course, everyone knows about Serum Institute and all that's happening in terms of developing a truly indigenous vaccine. There are, various efforts in terms of developing new therapeutics. My own company is repurposing a drug to see whether that will basically save lives. So there's a lot of exciting things happening. I think a lot of people want to know when will the vaccine actually be approved. And the answer to that is, look, everyone is very optimistic about it being approved in some form by the end of this year. And it is possible, but it is not going to be a final approval. It is likely to be a kind of a conditional emergency use approval. But even that's good enough because then a lot of people do get access to such a vaccine. Personally, I believe it won't be just one vaccine. I think you'll have 2 or 3 vaccines being approved. And that's also good news for the world. And I think India will have to look at a vaccine that is affordable and that is easy to deliver.
So besides vaccine, is there some chance that maybe one of these drugs, you hear about Sorrento, you hear about Remdesivir and all of these, do you think that has any strength?
Look, Remdesivir or, the Sorrento drug is still in vitro. It has got no in vivo data. But I think what is important is that there's a lot of drugs under trials. And I think we should not just focus on one or two drugs, because I think remdesivir has got a lot of publicity, but we still need to wait for the data. And I don't think it is going to be the miracle drug that everyone is hoping it will be. Similarly, there are many other drugs that are being trialed. So I think we need to evaluate the role of each drug. And I think it's important for us to be very optimistic that we can manage the disease. If we can use a combination of all these drugs to save lives and to prevent the mortality rate and to significantly reduce the mortality rate, I think that would be a big win.
Okay, good. So I have a whole bunch of questions, and I don't think we have time for that many. Being a popular personality, everyone wants to know everything. But the first one that I'm going to go at is a question from Utkarsh, which he's saying to Kiran ma'am, since value creation is paramount, how far would the philanthropic act of giving go forth in a post-COVID age?
Well, I think philanthropy at the time of COVID has been extremely impressive in many, many ways. I know that there was crowdsourcing for COVID, and that was very successful. I for India, that whole program that took place, a huge amount was collected from various people around the country. So I think that was very indicative of the kind of giving culture that we have. But you're right. I mean, how do we make this sustain after COVID? I think we need to focus on a few national missions like universal healthcare. The COVID has also now reminded us that there are many people who are so poor that they need to be supported. How about, philanthropy for contributing towards a universal basic income? Those kind of things. Can we look at migrant workers and how to support them in a sustainable way? Many, many, many opportunities for philanthropy to think of. And I think it's up to all of us to really find our niche, our area of concern and interest.
Okay, good, thank you. And then there's a question from Nishant from Seva International. Net it out, it basically saying, instead of super rich doing philanthropy directly, would it make sense if to improve the healthcare facilities, we have, let's say, 3% extra tax on super rich? Would that be something that would work?
I think this is a very easy way of saying, let's tax the super rich. I think I would like to see the super rich being more philanthropic, and that goes a much better way and much more effective way of solving problems than keeping on taxing people, because taxes are never used in the right way. And I believe that it's philanthropy that actually can make the difference. So for instance, if you see the amount of philanthropy that has gone into creating upgraded hospital facilities, for instance, this time around, I think that is commendable. You look what's happening in Mumbai, in Bangalore, in Delhi, wherever you look at it, philanthropy has come forward to basically create new wards, to upgrade existing hospitals, to provide ventilators. These are acts of philanthropy which are very, very important. If you just wanted to tax the super rich will feel fine. You've taxed us, so why do we need to do anything? I don't like that kind of attitude. So I think taxation is not the right way.
Okay, thank you so much. And then there is a question from Ishpita. She's saying, what is holding back more women entrepreneurs in India? How can this community support them?
Well, I think there has been a lot of bias in terms of investing in women entrepreneurs. There seems to be an old boys club that prefers to invest in male-led businesses. Unfortunately, that's still true. I have been through it in my early days when I knew that there was a huge gender bias when it came to investing. I've been always told that women are not big risk takers, women are not aggressive, women are not business sort of savvy. I think all that is a myth. I think today you can see that even in the vaccine world, I just had a panel discussion yesterday with two amazing women in the vaccine world. One is Suchitra Ella, who is the wife of Krishna Ella from Bharat Biotech. And the other is my very dear friend Mahima Datla, who heads Biologically. These are very large vaccine companies. And Mahima is someone who is so cerebral, so business savvy. And I don't see why we have to keep on, explaining or defending this particular area. I think people are missing a huge opportunity if they don't invest in women entrepreneurs and women-led businesses. And I think this is the time where we are seeing that a large number of initiatives and new ideas are coming from both men and women alike.
Okay, great. And so the last question is, what kind of purchasing power and behavior are you seeing in Indian women, especially from a health perspective?
Well, I think, it depends which strata of society you look at. If you look at the urban woman, I think the urban woman is certainly very confident and very health conscious and making sure that a lot of her money is spent on fitness and looking good and looking fit. The rural woman, I think, is aspiring for, looking good and feeling confident. And I think a lot of money now is being invested in education. The rural woman, the rural mother spends a lot of money on educating her children. I think that's a very good sign. The urban mother also would do anything to educate her children to be very well educated. So I think in India, we spend a lot of money on education. And recently, I think we are beginning to look at health and fitness as a very important area to also look at.
Thank you very much. We only have a minute now, and so I'll give you the floor to make your parting comments.
Well, my parting comments to everyone is, please understand that it's important for a country like India to be entrepreneurial, to create wealth, and make a difference with the wealth you create.
Kiran, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure speaking to you, and look forward to chatting with you soon again.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I wanted to do is that I wanted to just show you the book. We'll come back and chat with Binny in a minute, and then I will give you some perspectives that I got, inspiring perspectives that I got from the book, which is what shall we do with all this money? Inspiring perspectives on wealth. There is a website which is allthismoney.com. So you can go to allthismoney.com and you can see a little bit more information on that. So with that, let me now switch and please bring Binny Bansal online. And so he's another successful billionaire entrepreneur. And Binny, welcome. I wanted to
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And so I wanted to just get the topic started. What shall I do with all this money? But again, yeah. Binny, just everybody in the Indian diaspora knows you, but we have got a wide audience from all over the world. And so may I please first request you to share your major milestones, where you grew up, your schooling, college, career?
Yeah, so I grew up in Chandigarh in North India and did schooling there. And then I went to Delhi for my engineering. I studied computer science at IIT Delhi. And then I worked for a couple of years came to Bangalore, worked there for a couple of years as a software engineer. And in my, so I worked at two companies. Firstly, I've worked at a company called Sagna. And then in early 2007, I joined Amazon as a software engineer. But at Amazon, our team didn't have a lot of work. So I was getting quite bored. I was not learning anything, not making any impact. So that was a time when I decided to start a company on my own, along with my co-founder Sachin, who had similar ideas. And that's when Flipkart idea got started in middle of 2007. And by end of 2007, we had launched the company. So Flipkart, as a lot of people would know, is an e-commerce company. It sells almost everything you can sell on the planet now. But the journey started with just one category, which was books. and we bootstrapped the company for first 2-3 years. We didn't with like $8,000 of savings we had over the first 2 years. And long story short, in 2018, Walmart acquired the company. And for the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of work in the entrepreneurship ecosystem and working with a lot of entrepreneurs, helping them investing in a lot of companies as well. And I also started this new, co-founded a new sort of platform called X210X Technologies, where the mission is to help growth companies in their scaling journey in multiple ways.
Okay, good. Thank you. So we'll come back to some of the recent things, but I just want to sort of take you back to your years of growing up. So you said you grew up in Chandigarh, you went to IIT Delhi. So can you just share some perspectives on your perspectives on wealth as you were growing up?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, sir. I think there was actually, I would say there was perspective, I would say, on money and work, but wealth, probably there was no sort of perspective on wealth or understanding of what wealth is. I mean, I grew up in a middle class family, and I think everybody around us was basically working to make a living and trying to have a comfortable life, sort of working to make money to have a comfortable life. And I think any or whatever wealth probably somebody created, they went into buying a house or something, right? So I did not actually probably have a perspective on wealth at that time, given I think given sort of the environment in which I grew in.
And so fast forwarding to today, now that you sort of made it like, grand slam out of the ballpark, home run or sixer, how has your perspective changed?
Yeah, I think so. Today, I think the perspective has obviously evolved in a fairly large way. I think the perspective on work for me, I think even from the beginning, and one of the key reasons to start Flipkart was also to really learn and have an impact, while making money was obviously also important. But I think the perspective on wealth is new, and I think the way I would think about it today, and it's still evolving, I would say. I mean, it's because if you think about it, since 2007 to almost 18, like 11 years, it was like a long marathon, and with no time to really look back and see where and think about deeply about all these things. I think it's been only maybe 18 odd months since things have changed a lot, and there's time to reflect on some of this. So I think the perspective of wealth is evolving. I think it is clear to me that I think wealth is sort of another means towards sort of the goal of creating impact in the world and the society, which was always the goal, I guess. Before that, there was no wealth, so it was only sweat you could use. It was only your efforts you could use. And I think going forward, I think it is basically now about using both effort and the sort of and wealth as two instruments to create impact in various ways. And obviously, one way that I've done and I know is through sort of a business by doing something on your own, by investing in other entrepreneurs who are also trying to make a change and trying to make an impact. And I think the new sort of other way I'm also exploring is philanthropy, and that is something I've started exploring maybe a year and a half back. I think first person.
So Binny, can we just come back to that in a second?
Yeah,
so
sure.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to come back to that. Before that, I want to just jump into the topic, which is what shall I do with all this money? So can I just sort of pick your brains? You've been now, after having exited, now you've had some time to start the process of thinking, and I want to get your ideas on thoughts on allocation of wealth, right? Everybody has allocation on wealth. You have family, welfare, long-term trust, philanthropy. Just give us your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think there is allocation of wealth. Also, I mean, it's also probably also linked to also linked to where you are in your sort of career as well, and what you're trying to do as well. So I think from an allocation perspective, what is clear from a long-term perspective, let's say 10 years, 15, 20 years from now, I think I see that a large part of the allocation is probably going to go towards more philanthropic activities. Whereas today, I think it is, again, given that there are other ways to create impact as well. So I'm looking at both the buckets. That one is obviously I want to invest in people who are trying to create impact, enable them. Second, what are things I want to do myself to create impact, and how much capital is needed for that, and how do you and some allocation goes there. And then for the future sort of significant allocation, I think to philanthropy, I mean, sort of an exploratory learning journey and allocating starting to allocate small amounts, working with 2-3 organizations, people to sort of learn and also discover what the things that I'm passionate about and I want to really get behind.
Okay, and so again, here is a question direct where we're just all trying to find out what's next for Binny. So is there another entrepreneurial idea which is coming out? Maybe you want to announce it today?
No, not really. I think it is still in a discovery mode.
Yes, but I mean, you're obviously so young that I'm sure that you will get ideas. But any vertical sector? I mean, do you still want to stay with e-commerce? You want to, are there other areas that you are discovering?
No, I think e-commerce was obviously an area where I mean I've done a lot of work already, and I think it is a very exciting sector, and probably after COVID it becomes even more exciting. But I think my interests had started to sort of widen about 3-4 years back. So I've ended up investing in a lot of different sectors, fintech, SaaS as well. And consumer brands, etc. So I think now the deep interest area is really entrepreneurship itself, and how entrepreneurs are changing, can create impact, and how they can really change, make things more efficient, drive sort of new innovations. So I think that area itself is probably the new playground.
Okay, great. So I'll come back to where I interrupted you, and sorry about that, but I just want to now ask you questions about when you started your giving journey. And I understand that you've already made a few grants. So can you please tell us about that now?
Yes. So as I said, I was sort of in an exploratory and discovery and learning mode from that perspective. So I think a good place to start, obviously, when you're in that journey is start sort of close to where you start with people who are close to you. So I started helping Mikin, who was our CTO in Flipkart and now runs the Udyam Foundation. So after exiting Flipkart in 2016, I think he started his philanthropic journey full time, and I got very excited about it for a couple of reasons. One, because it was obviously Mikin who was doing it, and I really respect what he can do, and I know him very well, and he's a really good friend. And second, I think the topic he chose, which was about change, which was about inculcating entrepreneurial mindset in the youth of the country, so that they can be self-reliant and do not need to depend on jobs which are not which the country doesn't really have in numbers that are needed. I think the mission was really amazing as well. And third, the way he was approaching it and thinking about it, and thinking about having impact at scale, and his execution approach, and was also something that looked very appealing to me. So that's one area where both from a time and money perspective, I've been fairly deeply involved. And second has been the Nest Foundation with Atul, where again, I'd known about Atul since he was at InMobi and in the startup ecosystem. So I've known about Atul, and we had a few meetings. And again, I got inspired by what he was trying to do about his mission of making basically getting more talent into philanthropy, basically growing philanthropy in the country itself, which is a huge mission in itself. And so that became the second area where I got involved both again from a time and from a grant perspective as well. And then the third one recently has been with my alma mater, with my college, IT Delhi, where they are starting a endowment fund. And I became sort of one of the founding members of the endowment fund, and I'm on the board of the fund as well, and I'm one of the key donors, early donors to the endowment fund for IT.
Oh, good. I mean, this is interesting. I mean, I absolutely adore the stuff that Atul is doing, Atul Shatija of Nudge, and also Mekin. I think this whole micro entrepreneurship idea was just mind blowing when he told me about it. And so they're continuing to just work progress on it. And I think this IIT Delhi initiative, I think this is fantastic. One of the things that I always talk about to friends, because I went to undergrad in India, but I went to graduate school in US. And my US alma mater, University of Texas at Austin, chases me, pings me, goes after me, their endowment, the way professionally they do it, other karte hain, they really do a different, way in which they do this fundraising for endowment, and also keep the alumni all packed together. And I think this is something that is missing. And so if IIT Delhi finds that sort of model, and that can be replicated in many, many other universities, especially some of the universities that are not as famous at IIT Delhi, if they get a good endowment project going, then I think you can improve the infrastructures, you can improve the education system, and of course the professors, etc. So again, I really appreciate your sharing those three theses with us. And so I just wanted to now just shift to the current pandemic, because everybody obviously has some thoughts on it. And so I want to just get some perspectives from you, in terms of what you see. That I know that you are in 2 cities, so maybe you can talk about that, so that from both the cities' perspective, what is your sense on this current pandemic?
Yeah, so I've been in Bangalore since last 3 or 4 months. I think once since sort of the pandemic really started in end of Feb. So I've not had a chance. So I don't have the perspective on Singapore. I think Singapore probably saw first wave very early when I was not there, and then things settled down, and now then they had a second wave, and again things are sort of settling back. I think it's a small country. It's probably easier to manage. I think things in India are obviously a bit different, where the lockdown has really helped, I guess. But even with the lockdown, we are seeing cases go up. So I think it's very important for, I think, everyone who can sort of afford to help others be willing to sort of do so at this time. It is a difficult time for everyone from both a health perspective and livelihoods perspective. And I think that's what I am trying to do as well. So along again with Atul on the Give India side, and helping with grants, and again my time on the advisory board as well.
Okay, thank you. And so I'm going to now switch to some of the questions that are coming. There are, again, zillions of questions coming. We don't have enough time, Binny. You're a popular person, but I'll just try and net it out on terms of the top questions that are coming up here.
Yeah.
So there's a question about from Chitra, that she's saying post-COVID, the e-commerce will definitely see a raise. And so are there any ideas for investment in training for jobs, especially for the most vulnerable migrant workers that can be part of the supply chain? And if so, what kind of investments would you prioritize? Top 3.
I think, yeah, absolutely. I think not just e-commerce. I think there's a host of sectors which will see different big uptick from in the post-COVID world. I think online education, edtech is going to be another large another sector, and I think even health tech might also see large uptick. So there is definitely going to be a need for a lot of new workforce coming into these sectors, and but I do think, I mean, the the investment into training and ramping up workforce will be done by the entrepreneurs running these companies in a systematic way. So I think that that's why I really believe in the power of entrepreneurship, and I think people working on a mission and doing things systematically in a sustainable way, because I think that I really believe in that model very deeply. So I think entrepreneurs will take care of it.
Okay, good. And so related to that, there is a question from Jonali who says, hello, Binny, women's entrepreneurship at the grassroots level needs a flip, especially after COVID. What are your thoughts on how to support efforts in this area?
Yeah, I think it's a deep question. There's probably no easy answer. I think things like Mickens program of micro entrepreneurship. Again, then there's another program called Game, which is it also works in the same field, not on mindset, but actually enabling entrepreneurship. And I think their goal is to have their goal is that 50% of those micro entrepreneurs should be women. So I think again a systematic sort of way of doing this and working with organizations who are doing this is probably important.
Okay. And then there is a question from Damayanti. She is asking, saying, can entrepreneurship really be taught? There are plenty of courses out there, but most successful entrepreneurs seem to be accidental or not trained in entrepreneurship. What are the 3 secrets of success for aspiring entrepreneurs in your view, Binny?
Yeah, I think entrepreneurship is as much as about mindset as it is about skills. So I think the first thing is really your mindset, and getting into the mindset of an entrepreneur. It's about being sort of having a vision, being confident about your dreams, and some ability to take risks as well, right? So all those mindsets and being persistent. So that's a mindset game. And then obviously there are skills about being sort of using money effectively and planning and all of that. So I think all of these can be actually, if you look at it, a lot of these can be inculcated. Some people are born with it. I think even when you say people are born with it, it is because mostly it is because of their environment or the experiences that they've gone through that they got these things inculcated rather than being born with it. So that's what I believe. And that's why I'm very big supporter of what Mickens is doing, because I believe entrepreneurship mindset can be inculcated into people. And actually he has proven that by now, after having worked with so many kids, that after this program, we have seen a 30-40% conversion rate where like there is a clear shift in mindset and sort of impact. So I think both the skills and the mindset can be changed. It's difficult, but I think I'm very bullish that we'll see a lot of impact coming from this program.
And so have you personally, Binny, are you from a business family, or your partner Sachin? I mean, either of you were from business family, and can you just give us a little bit of genesis of how that happened?
Yeah.
How did you become an entrepreneur?
Yeah. No, so I'm not from a business family at all. So my father was a manager in Punjab National Bank, and my mom was a section officer in the Government of India. But Sachin comes from a business family. So his father was in the business of trading in Chandigarh. But I think for me, again, the becoming an entrepreneur was again about sort of learning and basically trying to make an impact. And I guess I had the risk appetite and the long-term view to do it. I think the way I thought about it was that if I do not do this, it is much more riskier than if I don't do it, it is much more risky if I stay in a job. It was that because I was not learning from a long-term perspective. I was not learning anything, going anywhere. So, and if I failed at this after a couple of years, I could still always go back to a job given the education and given my skills. So I think that confidence was there. So there was no need for a backup, so as to speak. So I think for me, it was that's what made the decision sort of easier to start.
Okay. Last couple of questions, Binny. One is, what needs to happen in order for affluent people to contribute more towards combating social issues? Does having a target goal like building 100 toilets would help, or else what should be other ways?
I think it has to be, I think the biggest one is going to be, I think you have to kind of start almost, you have to start a movement like that. So it has to be probably a lot about things which, like Kiran was talking about, like the Giving Pledge and the IPI initiative, like people inspiring other people. I think and then yes, some top level goals about it, like universal healthcare, universal education, like having some really inspirational goals to go after. And then I think people sort of learning from other people who've done that and getting inspired by philanthropic journeys of other people. For example, for me, I think Azim Premji's journey has been probably very inspirational. I think the way it's gone about it, and not just his own philanthropic journey, but the way he's also trying to get the whole ecosystem going. So I think those things can have a big impact.
Okay, thank you. And the last question is that Sabina is asking this, that Binny, are you a bigger fan of more Indian unicorns or more Indian mass entrepreneurship, and why?
I think both are important. I think for a country like India, you need both. I think unicorns are important because some things can be done only efficiently at scale, and so you do need entrepreneurs who can build things at scale, so that for the consumers or for businesses, things become more efficient, less costly, and more effective. And I think for a country of the size of India, mass entrepreneurship is also equally important, because there are never going to be enough jobs. So we need a large part of the workforce to be self-reliant, to be able to stand on their own feet. And that's also where I think unicorns can create platforms where they enable a lot of this as well. So I think it's a good symbiotic relationship which probably needs to exist going forward.
Okay. Thank you, Binny. And I just want to give you the platform now, if you want to spend a couple of minutes on just parting thoughts, parting words.
Yeah, I think my parting words would be probably to, I think again, so younger audience, that I think creating, sort of thinking about creating impact for others in a country like India is very important, whether and using all the means you have to do that, whether it's it could be your efforts or time, and I mean, if you have money to spare as well, then it could be financial as well. I think doing that, especially in these times, would go a long way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Binny. I really appreciate your taking the time today and share your valuable insights. And thank you to both you, Binny, and to Kiran. I'm just going to spend the next few minutes, because Atul wanted me to leave some big picture takeaways from my book, What Shall We Do With All This Money? So again, here is the book of interviews that I've compiled. It's called What Shall We Do With All This Money? Inspiring Perspectives on Wealth. And there is a website there, which is allthismoney.com. So you can go to that and see some more information on it. But I will just give you the upshot is, for people who joined us late, that it's a compilation of book of interviews, which I did last year. And it is an interview with over 50 heroes and unsung heroes of men and women of Indian diaspora from worldwide, from US, from UK, Africa, Middle East, Singapore, Malaysia, India. Folks like, again, I've mentioned these names. I'm just mentioning them again for people who might have joined late. People like Mr. Ratan Tata, Amit Chandra, Rohini Nilekani, Vineet Rai, Vikram Gandhi, Professor Jagdish Sheth, Shekhar Kapoor, Sanjeev Bikhchandani, Mohandas Pai, Om Swami, Deepak Chopra, and many others. So the most important and common theme is that everyone from Indian diaspora is committed to giving back to the community. So again, there are no easy answers from talking to all these people in terms of allocation of funds, which I also asked Kiran and Binny. But again, there is not sort of a set pattern. There are no easy answers to allocation of funds because it depends on our individual situation. However, what jumps out is the sectors that the Indian diaspora likes is education and healthcare sort of jumps out, and entrepreneurship. Now, entrepreneurship and is of two types, right? So there is a tech entrepreneurship startup world, and then there is, of course, this social entrepreneurship, and which I'll talk about in a second. So these two sort of are the biggest thing that came out. The biggest motivation for me to write this book was for millennials, right? So there's a section on millennials, which is most inspiring. So millennials are going to inherit, millions and hundreds of millions, specifically of Indian diaspora, are going to inherit hundreds of millions of dollars worldwide. And so I have a section in it where I've interviewed a bunch of millennials, and the good news is that all of them are looking for purpose, right? So this is one common theme. And so as you read the interviews in the millennial section, you can check out, the names of the millennials also in allthismoney.com. So today the affluent folks are caught, right, in this sudden downturn in their portfolios and their businesses. They want to contribute to COVID-19 funding, and requests are coming from every corner. Everyone is trying to do their part and also looking for help. And of course, once this pandemic is over, we have to continue on this sustainable development goals. So again, part of the book, there is one thing that comes out also is that beside allocation to giving, right, which is grants, non-profit, basically you give and there is no economic returns, only social impact returns. The other one is microfinance and micro-lending. So that money circles back, it comes back to you, you can put it back into the system. So it does good while it's circulating out there in micro-lending. And then, of course, social impact happens, but you get that back and then you circulate it. But the third one, which is most important in terms of the current timing, is people like Avishkar, people like Vineet Rai, who's also been interviewed in the book, is something which we call impact investing, right? So beyond all these institutions, the many DFIs, institutions, family offices, charitable trusts, high net worth individuals, they are looking at social impact investing, which is for-profit companies which are doing good, right, on all these vertical sectors. So that's pretty much all the time I have. I'd love for you to go on allthismoney.com and discover this book. What shall we do with all this money? Inspiring perspectives on wealth, and look forward to getting feedback from you guys as well. In the meantime, may I please personally thank Nudge and Atul Shatija and team of Nisha and all this team at Nudge, and very heartfelt thanks to Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw and to Binny Bansal. Thank you very much, folks. Over to you, Lakshmi.
Thank you so much for this really engaging conversation, Jayesh and Binny. We will look to the book. Looks like it's full of interesting conversations. We will now be moving to breakout sessions on the respective tracks for the next couple of hours. Before we reconvene back here for the closing plenary session at 1 p.m. for a conversation with a couple of India's biggest philanthropists, Rohini Milakani and Ashish Tavan. Until then, goodbye, and I look forward to seeing you back here at 1 p.m. Take care.